Though irreparable the anguish and profound the grief, the febrile admiration of the unbowed black people kept Malcolm alive in their hearts. The strength and courage that emanated from his life radiates the freedom struggle in America today. No bullets could destroy what he was and what he meant. No sanctioned press could obliterate his image. No terror tactic, witch hunt, could crush his following. Malcolm was a mortal who became a symbol, a black man who challenged the Western world, a captive in his own land who would not be a slave nor colleague to an oppressive system, a rock that developed into a diamond through the pressures and abrasions of life. For in such ways are leaders created. What he spawned, the ideals, purpose, and goals of black nationalism and unity, is flowering in the militancy of his people and tossing away the chains of institutionalized thinking. A new, energizing race of young black men and women walk Harlem streets, aware and proud of their heritage, knowing from whence they came, how they were destroyed by Western culture, and where they are going without being led by others. These are the products sown by Malcolm's unquenchable zest for liberation. Du Bois once wrote, "Throughout history, the powers of single black men flash here and there like falling stars, and die sometimes before the world has rightly gauged their brightness. However, the many heroic black men and women, too, that American history books have buried are rising out of the past, and their feats are being duplicated. Their deeds and their lives were not only momentary flashes like falling stars, but steadfast glows that lit the darkness of several centuries." Malcolm was more than a fallen star, or an ordinary star, which is sometimes visible and sometimes obscure. His life is a simile that only be correlated with the most brilliant of all the stars in the heavens, the North Star. For the North Star is the one star that does not change position or lose its bright intensity. It is the star that set the course for mariners, and that gave direction to slaves escaping bondage, and communicated men's hopes by illusion. It is thus obvious and apropos that we dedicate the first issue of the North Star to Malcolm, whom we feel most aptly personifies the significance of this title, triumphantly illuminating today's stark atmosphere, giving light and direction, invincible and indistinguishable. Malcolm is that North Star shining. The following is an excerpt that I am taking from Yuri Kochiyama's book, Passing It On. Yeah, Passing It On. And it is concerning Japanese nationals who at the time were called the Hibakusha and their visit to Harlem. So here goes. On that day, the Hibakusha writers first visited a black school and a black church. Then they decided they wanted to walk around Harlem by themselves and not with their overly protective white hosts who helped coordinate their itinerary. They had lunch at a restaurant called 22 on 135th Street where Malcolm used to eat. They met some black nursing students who recognized the Hibakusha, who were on television program the night before. Then the group walked all the way to 114th Street. This was Jesse Gray's area, where the world's worst fair was taking place, while the regular tourist attraction fair was held at Flushing Meadows in Queens. Harlem activists thought of the unique ideal of opening up a fair, in quotations, in one of the most impoverished blocks in Harlem so that tourists could see how some people in Harlem had to live under the supervision of uncaring landlords and the sanitation department. The Hibakusha writers saw some of the realities of Harlem they would have otherwise missed if they did not go to 114th Street and check out the world's worst fair. Living quarters with broken windows, broke down staircases, toilets that wouldn't flush, and clogged up bathtubs, and garbage piled high on the streets. The Hibakusha contingent finally came to our apartment. They immediately thanked us for suggesting that they first visit the world's worst fair. I don't know much about Yuri Kochiyama, but I am starting to evolve and learn. But when I say evolve, I mean the attempt to read more, not so much evolve on race, because I hate no race of people on this planet whatsoever. I still don't understand that, but that's not the subject of this conversation. The two excerpts I read was from Yuri Kochiyama's autobiography, or will more so say her memoir, Passing It On, in which she discusses the Asian American movement, as well as correlating it with her own movement, such as the Black American movement. I'm going to read this book in its entirety when I have time. Once I take some downtime in December, that's probably when I'm going to finish Yuri Kochiyama. She dedicated the whole chapter 6 to Malcolm X. They had been trying to reach him and wanted to meet him. It's important to note that this is like less than 2 years before he died, I believe. So Yuri Kochiyama was interested in meeting him at a time when Malcolm was calling for the human rights of all people of color, not just the people in his own country who by then had been so-called free, according to emancipation, for over 100 years. And I think she understood and liked his dedication and his fire. We also must understand that Yuri Kochiyama, there are two realities about Yuri Kochiyama that make a whole lot of sense to the struggle. Number one, she was forced into a concentration camp. Although the book hints, because I haven't read it yet, that she was one of the few Japanese families that they actually got their house back post World War II. Remember, and that happened in the 1940s. I think she had married her husband, her late husband, because both of them, of course, have passed. She had married her husband a year after the war. So Yuri fully understood almost 20 years later when she met Malcolm X what it was like for somebody to look at you and by virtue of your outside veneer and the surface that you are a stigma. Number two, and the thing that I didn't know but doesn't surprise me, is that she was one of the few people of color that was not black, that was extremely close to Malcolm X and was standing right there with him at his last, what we would call speaking engagement, and saw him get shot. And we cannot say that the trauma of that probably didn't follow her for the rest of her life. Because there's a tad difference between being a casual observer, right, and knowing something happened to someone, and you only got the perspective of what was told in the media. And we can go all day, but we're not going to in what the media may or may not lie about. There's a difference between that being dictated to you and living that in itself. See what Yuri Kochiyama represents, because at the same time, I think they were about to start pushing that model minority myth, which I would argue may hurt Asian Americans to a degree. It helps, but it also hurts because it makes the assumption that they should just be happy with their success. And can success really make you happy? But Yuri lived pre-model minority myth when she understand that just how she looked as a born American made it a stigma. And I think in this book, and I hadn't been through it yet, there are photos of her within internment. You see her in uniform, her husband served, and I think her twin brother served. This was not a country that was kind to certain people. Kids of Japanese heritage today probably speak with their grandparents or great-grandparents, and they get the gist and the hurt of what concentration camps caused people of Japanese descent in this country, despite the fact that we know now that a great majority of them, there were a few outliers, but the great majority were loyal to the United States. The first excerpt I read is what Yuri Kochiyama felt in an emotional state after watching someone who was probably becoming a friend get shot. And naturally so, because it must have been traumatizing and devastating to know that something was going to die with this man. The second excerpt is the Japanese nationals who were visiting. And that excerpt is my favorite from that chapter. See, I won't read that entire chapter because I would prefer that people who care to educate themselves go get this book, whether get you an online version or get you a hard copy version like I have. It was telling that 20 years, I would say almost 20 years after the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan, that Japanese nationals were invited to the United States. And the book implies that the people who were playing their host, unfortunately, they're white, so I have no part in that. That's not to carry up hate in here. So please don't leave hateful comments just because white people are white, okay? But some things did happen. So that group of men were taken to Harlem to be shown the truth about this so-called liberty that the United States claimed to live, when in reality they didn't believe in it really. She is a representation of a unity that we don't talk about now. Because rarely will you see Black Americans and Asian Americans discuss this in huge numbers, meaning I see some videos with small numbers in solidarity, but no one really discusses this now. We live with the ideal that all of these movements were separate from each other. When you really look back, a lot of the other races of people, even white Jews who died in the South during the American Civil Rights Movement, there were those sit-ins and things like that. You have people like the white guy Jim Zwerg, who became a pastor. They don't tell you that these races overlapped and that these divides had a reason. The divisiveness that we see now with the Black and Asian community, and we know what those various divisive things are. And I'll discuss the whole thing with businesses and going into stores probably in another video. I'm still on the fence by the recording of this because I'm recording it in February and it won't play to November. If I want to touch on that painful hot button topic, particularly what happened with the LA riots with Koreans and Blacks. But the Hibakusha proves what I've known for many years. Because I think keeping the Hibakusha from going into the seedy part of 114th in Harlem is evidence that if you remove someone from seeing something, it can impact them. But once they see something that is unjust and not right, they can't unsee it, right? This is no different with Yuri watching Malcolm X be shot, because she had to live with that for the rest of her life. And surely it must have been scary as a young woman who lived in an internment camp and for a time lost her house. I know I'm rambling, but the point about this is that you see these divisive videos of people talking about there's anti-Asianness in the Black community, and those people are correct. To a degree, there's a small fringe of Black people who do say some stuff about Asian Americans. Then you have anti-Blackness in the Asian community, which we know is entirely true. Like Black people being kicked out of stores in China. And then Nigeria decided to clap back and kick the Chinese out. So this is hardly just a United States issue. So I will I'm done rambling, but I'll leave you with this question. Do you suppose that when the model minority myth, that article that was written by, I forgot who that person's name was, do you suppose, while that was an excellent article, that that person could have possibly understood the magnitude of the problem that that would cause between Black and Asian Americans? See, the reason I say this is because the argument was, well, in less than 100 years, Asian people are already more successful than their Black counterparts. I would clap back and argue, of course they would be, because there was no Jim Crow. And don't get me wrong, Jim Crow in the South, if you were not white, you were not white. They still discriminated against you. But there were always mechanisms in place to keep certain people from rising. And don't get it twisted, I fully understand that when they took land from the Japanese, everyone didn't get their land back. And this is one of those things where I'm going to avoid the reparations, because Japanese people got them, whereas blacks didn't. So I know that's going to cause some consternation as well. If it's not the minority model myth, when do you think that Asian and Black Americans had started to become each other's enemy from a macro stand? Because in the micro, when you go talk to people on the ground, most people don't seem to carry these prejudices and racist views anymore. Well, all right. Thank you all for listening. And I'm going to leave you with a quick stinger with Malcolm X. Have a great day.